I stared at the screen, blinking once, then twice, as if repetition would rewrite the number staring back at me. 1 Ponrero hour. My name, Celine Marrow, sat cleanly in the upper corner of the pay stub, but everything beneath it felt like a punch to the chest. No glitch, no error message, just confirmation of something deliberate, ruthless, and worst of all, approved by Alicia Chen. That name, typed neatly beside Garrett Holloway's electronic signature, stung more than the wage itself. Alicia had once cried in my office years ago when she'd botched an internal compliance report that could have cost her job. I rewrote the protocol overnight. I'd vouched for her when legal circled. She called me her shield. And now, she had signed off on reducing me to a rounding error. Slack messages popped in like blinking sirens. Celine, is this a joke? 1 hour, what's going on? Did you piss off Garrett? I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Everyone saw it. The payroll dashboard was centralized across Nexora Corp. Over 20,000 employees, managers, analysts, warehouse workers. Truck dispatchers could now scroll through compensation reports and see the company's lead system strategist humiliated in real time. I closed the window. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from calculation. Mom's new prescription cost $340 a month, non-generic. Her last refill was already split in half to stretch, and Ray, my daughter, had just received her acceptance letter to Columbia. I still had the envelope tacked to the fridge. We had made it work all these years because I was always 3 steps ahead of the budget, of the chaos, of the company. I had automated the impossible, fixed what no one noticed, stayed up nights resolving cascading failures before they surfaced. I had built the system that kept Nexora from collapsing in on itself. Now they had made me expendable, a placeholder, a warning to others. And Alicia had made herself a gatekeeper for a kingdom I designed. I didn't delete my access. I didn't shout. I simply leaned back, exhaled, and opened the OpsNet dashboard not to fix anything, just to watch the warning lights start blinking red. OpsNet wasn't built overnight. It was stitched together line by line over weekends and holidays, in between warehouse emergencies and HR delays. It started as a patch, a simple overtime recalculation tool I wrote in my first year. Then came shift validation, load routing, compensation flowcharts. Every time someone said, "That's too complicated," I made it work. 12 years later, OpsNet is the company's heartbeat. Every schedule, every truck route, every payroll entry pulses through it. I built it quietly, not for praise, but to prevent collapse. I was offered a VP role 6 years ago. Garrett called it a natural next step, but my mother had just been diagnosed. Mild at first, some memory loss, some confusion, but I knew what it meant. So I turned the offer down. I said, later, when things settle. They never did. Garrett didn't wait. He promoted Levi Dane, a director with a Wall Street resume and a taste for cutting labor costs. Levi's first proposal was to lay off 9% of night shift workers across 5 hubs, claiming efficiency. I stopped it cold. The numbers didn't justify the move. My projections showed system-wide delays, OT spikes, and vendor penalties. He never forgave me. I didn't realize until last quarter that he'd been advising Garrett's son, Blaine Holloway, fresh out of a business analytics program, suddenly quoting system metrics he shouldn't even have had access to. I caught a screenshot of a Slack message once blurred, but unmistakable. Levi's handle. Blaine's response will bring it up with Dad. They weren't just planning my replacement. They were repackaging my system. My pride had always come from things no one could see: schedules that ran on time, trucks that didn't idle, paychecks that didn't bounce. But now, All the things I built without recognition were being claimed by men with louder voices and cleaner shoes. Legacy was never about credit to me. It was about stability. But now I was watching my legacy become someone else's leverage. I clicked open the root folder for OpsNet. Every core function, every trigger, every safeguard. And for the first time in years, I stopped typing. The all-hands meeting was held in the top-floor atrium, where sunlight bounced off glass walls and everyone pretended the view made the work meaningful. Rows of chairs, fresh pastries no one touched, cameras on. Garrett stood in the center like a man unveiling a statue of himself. He opened with words about innovation, vision, continuity. I'd heard this script before every time someone was being replaced under the guise of evolution. This time, it was my turn. And today, Garrett beamed. I'm proud to introduce the next generation of Nexora leadership. Please welcome our new lead system strategist, Blaine Holloway. Polite applause echoed across the room, the kind that fills silence but means nothing. Blaine stepped forward in a blazer too tight and a confidence too large. He adjusted the mic like he was on stage at a tech summit. Thanks, Dad, Garrett, he said with a smirk. It's an honor to carry this system forward. I've been reviewing OpsNet for the past month and, honestly, there's some real brilliance in here, but also a lot of clutter, laughter, nervous, from people who didn't want to be noticed not laughing. Don't worry, he added, turning to me with that frat boy grin. I'll be cleaning it up. No offense, Celine. But we're in 2025, not 2009. It's time for a system upgrade. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I saw the way people looked at me, half pity, half relief it wasn't them. To the room, I looked like I was accepting my sunset, a quiet exit after years in the dark. But they didn't know that OpsNet wasn't some dusty archive. It was living, breathing, fragile in ways only I understood. I had built something no one else could fully replace, and now they'd put a child at the wheel of a machine he couldn't name, let alone drive. I waited for the meeting to end. Then I walked back to my office, logged into OpsNet, and did the hardest thing I've ever done. I left the warnings unread. The next morning, I arrived at my usual time, 6:18 a.m. The floor was empty except for the soft hum of servers and the scent of last night's burnt coffee lingering in the break room. My desk lamp blinked once as I powered it on, like it was waiting to be told what crisis to fix. I sat down, typed in my credentials, and waited for the dashboard to load. OpsNet opened like it always did, a wall of quiet chaos that only I had ever fully deciphered. The alerts had already started. 3 division mismatches in the scheduling module, a time clock loop in the Central Ohio branch, 2 split route errors for the Thursday logistics cycle. All small now, but give them 12 hours and they'd ripple. Normally, I would have started triage. I had macros for half of it, manual fixes for the rest, everything sharpened through repetition, everything invisible by design. But this time, I did nothing. I watched the alert stack, watched the blinking amber lights pulse into red, and then I leaned back in my chair. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't revenge. It was restraint. I reached into my drawer and pulled out my badge. It still had the old Nexora logo, from before the rebrand, before Garrett's clean fonts and empty slogans. I turned it over in my hand, then placed it gently on the desk. My computer chimed another escalation. Payroll flags in the Northeast. Double entries. I didn't even glance. I stood up, walked past my team's cubicles, past Alicia's office with its frosted glass and carefully curated family photos, past the wall where they'd eventually hang Blaine's portrait, framed and sterile, at the elevator. I hesitated. Not because I was uncertain, but because part of me knew the system was already breathing on its own, and already failing. By the time I reached the lobby, another warning had triggered in OpsNet. It would be Blaine's first live test, and I wouldn't be there to catch the fall. I came in later than usual. No badge, no schedule. Just a silent walk to an empty cubicle near the back where no one would notice me. From my vantage point, I could see him. Blaine, seated in my old chair, already leaning too far back like he owned the air. He had a stylized coffee cup in one hand and a smug kind of purpose in the other. OpsNet was open in front of him. The warnings had stacked overnight shift conflicts, route mismatches, duplicate entries, a blinking wall of red and amber, each line a thread in a web only I knew how to untangle. He barely looked at them. One eyebrow raised, then a scoff. He turned to the analyst standing nearby, grinning. "Look at this mess," he muttered. "No wonder she kept it locked down." The analyst didn't respond, just nodded politely and stepped back. Blaine cracked his knuckles like it was a video game. Then he hovered over the admin panel, selected all alerts, and with a dramatic flourish, clicked Approve All. The screen turned green. Rows and rows of alerts disappeared in a flurry of automated checkmarks. To the untrained eye, it looked brilliant. Clean. Resolved. "Boom," Blaine said. "That's leadership." I exhaled slowly because I knew better. He hadn't resolved anything. He had validated every error, authorized every contradiction. Each approval sent a ripple through the system. Schedules locked in faulty shifts. Overtime codes doubled across time zones. Warehouse deliveries cross-fired into non-existent routes. The machine wasn't calming. It was accelerating under a polished illusion. I folded my hands in my lap. This wasn't a victory. It was an ignition. The system had just entered a fail state that couldn't be undone without disassembling the core. By noon, the impact would hit payroll. By evening, freight delays. By tomorrow, contracts. And he'd have no idea why. By the time the second payroll batch ran, the first cracks had already spread. Regional hubs began calling in Midwest first, then South Atlantic. Staff were double booked for overlapping shifts in 2 cities. Others weren't scheduled at all. A junior team lead in Cincinnati sent a screenshot to HR a check showing overtime for a warehouse she hadn't stepped foot in. No one could explain it. Drivers were dispatched with no cargo manifests. Trucks arrived at the wrong docks, while time-sensitive freight sat untouched in receiving bays. A cold chain shipment meant for a hospital expired in the sun. Inside the system, the dashboard pulsed like a wounded thing. Line after line glowed in warning red. Payroll queues looped endlessly. The accounting team flagged the initial discrepancy, a compounding misfire in pay routing. Each approval had duplicated entries across division silos. The figure climbed fast, 1.2 million an hour. Real money. Gone. But instead of checking the architecture, the execs checked optics. The comms team drafted a statement about temporary maintenance delays. That afternoon, a video surfaced online. 3 machinists from the Akron plant stood outside the gates holding their pay stubs to the camera. "This is Nexora," one shouted, voice shaking. "They sent us $7.98 for 60 hours of work. We can't eat chaos." Within an hour, it hit trending. The hashtags followed: Nexora collapse, approve all disaster. We can't eat chaos. Still, no one called me. Not to ask. Not to understand. Not even to accuse. Because they never believed OpsNet needed a builder. Just someone to click the buttons. From a quiet workstation in the satellite wing, I watched the flags multiply. I knew where the next breaks would hit. Vendor contracts, carrier reimbursement, insurance protocols, none of it out of vengeance, just gravity, and the sound of a blueprint being ignored. By mid-morning, Garrett stormed into the executive suite like a general mid-defeat. Sleeves rolled, tie loose, rage barely restrained. He called an emergency meeting, summoned everyone with a title above director. I wasn't on the list, but no one stopped me when I walked in and took a chair in the far corner. "Let's not pretend we don't know who did this," Garrett snapped. "Celine built the damn system. If it's failing, it's because she wanted it to." No one spoke. Eyes darted to the floor or fixated on their tablets. He gestured to the IT director. "Pull the logs. Now, I want every approval, every override, every action tied to her account." The director hesitated. "We already ran them, sir." Garrett froze, and the man cleared his throat. The root sequence that triggered the cascading approvals came from a single digital signature: Blaine's. Silence dropped like a stone. Across the table, Blaine shifted in his seat. "That's not possible. I didn't touch anything critical." The analyst leaned forward, tablet in hand. Time-stamped. Authenticated. It was your login, your credentials. You clicked Approve All across core modules. "That function isn't supposed to be used for batch authorization." Blaine flushed, looked to his father, then back at the room. "I was told to act fast. My dad said approving everything would settle the noise." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I said to take initiative, not crash payroll." The directors looked between them like they were watching a building tip, still in the corner. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The room wasn't angry at me. It wasn't even surprised. It was quiet in the way people go still when denial runs out of air. The logs hadn't just exonerated me. They'd drawn a clear, digital path from the top of the hierarchy straight to the source of collapse. I didn't smile. There was nothing to celebrate. I simply folded my hands and waited, because I knew what came next. The truth never needed a microphone. It had already been written into the code. It started with a ping in one of the internal Slack channels. A file drop. No context. Just a file name Blaine leadership move. At first, I thought it was satire. One of the younger engineers venting frustration the way tech people do memes, voiceovers, inside jokes. But when I clicked play, my breath caught. The footage was raw, screen captured during Blaine's first morning in my chair. He sat confidently. OpsNet open, surrounded by blinking red alerts. A junior analyst hovered nearby. Blaine laughed. "I fixed her mess with one click," he said, tapping the Approve All button like it was a joke punchline. "That's leadership." The analyst's face stayed neutral, but the recording caught it all. The timestamp matched the initial collapse. The approval history aligned. It wasn't satire, it was evidence. Within 20 minutes, the clip was being shared across internal chats. Within 2 hours, it was on LinkedIn and Reddit. 30 minutes later, it hit Twitter now, X with trending tags. Investors called, clients paused contracts. One major stakeholder, Lionmark Equity, released a public statement. "We are divesting our position in Nexora Corp, effective immediately, due to reckless leadership succession." Garrett tried damage control, but the narrative had outpaced him. The video looped in boardrooms and break rooms. Blaine's voice, smug and oblivious, became a punchline for everything wrong with top-down arrogance. And in the middle of it all, I got a message in an old engineer group chat I hadn't touched in years. "We always knew it was you holding this place up. They thought the lights stayed on by magic. Thank you for all of it." I stared at the messages for a long time. Not because I needed the validation, but because I hadn't realized how many people had been watching silently, just like I had. Legacy, it turned out, wasn't about plaques or promotions. It was about who remembered you when everything else failed. And the system, it was still falling, 3 days after the clip leaked. Nexora's front lobby turned into a rotating door of dark suits and quiet panic. Consultants, technical specialists, external auditors. They arrived with lanyards, clipboards, and the quiet confidence of people used to being called in at the 11th hour. Garrett greeted them like saviors. He promised resources, full access, whatever you need. They dove into OpsNet like it was a malfunctioning circuit board. But by noon, the first team lead pulled Garrett aside and asked the question I knew was coming. Who built the root-level logic for the adaptive modules? Garrett gestured toward an org chart and said something vague about legacy engineering. But they couldn't find documentation. No design notes, no API keys for the nested exception layers. Because it wasn't written to be inherited, it was written to work. By the second day, the consultants escalated the matter to the board. Their report was short. I heard it summarized in the hallway by someone who didn't know I was behind the door. These aren't bugs. They're intentional structures. Dynamic, stable, but personalized. The only person who can stabilize this is the one who built it. Garrett didn't respond. He didn't need to. The damage wasn't just technical. It was financial. Insurance denied the claims. Failure due to internal authorization, they said. In other words, you did this to yourselves. The board convened behind frosted glass, longer than usual. I didn't attend. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Word spreads when money disappears. By the end of the week, Garrett and Blaine were both suspended indefinitely pending transition review. Their names were scrubbed from the signature headers. Their calendar access revoked. No headlines, no farewell speeches. Just absence, and still, the system wasn't fixed because it had never been sabotaged. It had simply stopped being protected. The failures weren't acts of war. They were acts of omission. I hadn't planted explosives. I just closed the window. Garrett once said that loyalty is measured by who stands with you in silence. But what he never understood was that silence can also be a verdict. And the louder the collapse became, the more undeniable that verdict sounded. By the time I walked past the executive floor again, no one made eye contact. They were too busy waiting for anyone to tell them how to stop the bleeding. The email came on a Sunday morning. No subject line. Just a sender I didn't recognize and a message that read, "We've been watching from the beginning. We know who kept Nexora standing. Would you be open to a conversation?" Attached was a PDF formal, precise. Nova Logics, Director of Systems Integrity. Full relocation package if needed. Salary 6 times what I'd earned at Nexora. Health coverage that made me exhale for the first time in weeks. A tuition clause that left no doubt Ray's future would be safe. There was no drawn-out negotiation. They knew my value without needing to be convinced. They'd seen the wreckage and read the logs the way some people read scripture, and they had recognized the author. By Monday, I'd signed. By Tuesday, my access to Nexora was quietly deactivated. I didn't need to return anything. The badge was still in the drawer, untouched since the day I placed it there. I opened my old laptop one last time, watched OpsNet attempt to load, blinking and lagging like a body trying to breathe underwater. Then I powered it down and closed the lid. It was over. Mom's next month of medication was already delivered, auto refill activated with the new insurance. Ray's deposit to Columbia cleared before she even asked. Garrett never apologized. Alicia never reached out. Blaine disappeared from company press channels like he'd never existed. But I didn't need an apology. I didn't want a speech. Silence had done what 1,000 memos never could. The system had fallen not because I tore it down, but because I stopped holding it up. And somewhere deep in the core files, the signature of that truth remained. Nova Logic sent me their internal documentation to review before onboarding. It was clean, basic, Their systems were functional but not intuitive. They ran because they had to. Now they wanted them to run because they could. They didn't ask for magic, just stability, precision, trust. I could give them that. I opened a fresh terminal window, fingers steady, mind clear, and began again, not as a ghost, fixing silent errors in the dark, but as the architect they asked for by name.